Bonjour, good afternoon, I should say now. So I would like to welcome you to this side event on the digital open school vision. My name is David Achwarena. I'm the director of the Unesco Institute for Lifelong Learning. And it's my pleasure to moderate the ministerial segment of this side event that will include different moments. The basis really for our discussion will be the discussion paper that was just presented during the session of the Thematic Action Track 4 on digital learning and transformation, which actually calls for all stakeholders to work together to build partnerships to contribute to building resilient, open digital school systems. And it is this concept that we're going to explore this morning. We hope that this discussion will also lay the ground for the establishment of a network of champion countries, but also partners which would be promoting and really contributing to developing this concept of open digital schools. So we're going to have a number of speakers, and I would like to welcome Madam Minister of Namibia, who will be speaking this morning on the experience in her country. We also have a representative from two other member states, the Secretary General of the National Commission for UNESCO of Côte d'Ivoire, as well as the Director of Policies in the Ministry of Education of Mongolia. So we have very different, I would say, contexts, and we will see how this concept of open digital schools is actually being applied in those different contexts and conditions. But to actually start our discussions, I will first give the floor to my colleague Feng Chung Miao, who is the Chief of the Unit for Technology and Artificial Intelligence in Education, for a first, I would say, overview of this concept, and his presentation will be followed by a presentation by Professor Rupert Wegerif from the University of Cambridge in the UK, who will, actually provide us a conceptual perspective of this notion of digital open schools. But first, Feng Chung Miao, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, David, for the moderation. Dear distinguished participants, it's my pleasure to share some views about this topic. Actually, I was behind this session, meaning that I proposed this session and also I conceptualized this discussion. So I would like to share our understanding and to set up the scene of this session's discussion. So I want to share what UNESCO can bring to the member states and to partners. We cannot only call the partners and the member states to do this and that without, to show that UNESCO is providing support or UNESCO is ready to cooperate. And secondly, we will show what we would like our partners and the member states to pay attention to, especially about the digital open schools. First of all, from UNESCO, I would like to see over almost 2 decades, we have more or less developed a portfolio. It's not only one single product or one dimension kind of supply. We have a portfolio to support national digital learning policies from 2 dimensions. The first one is the key areas. We are focusing on the sector-wide national ICT education policy and a master plan, but we also go deeper to different thematic focuses, including the open education resources, but also the AI and the education, and also the implications of emerging technology for education. So this one dimension is the key areas. And then the other dimension is the key functions of Unesco. And through these key functions, we are producing and releasing international standard setting instruments for all these areas we mentioned. For example, for the ICT education policy, we have the Qingdao Declaration that was released in 2015. And for OER, we have the OER recommendation. And also for AI and education, we have Beijing Consensus on AI and education. And at the same time, we're also producing, together with the international expert, the intellectual guidance and guidelines on different areas. We have guidelines for all these 3 areas, and I will introduce them later. And at the same time, we call ourselves catalyst of international cooperation. So we have been convening international conferences like this. More specifically, we have organized Mobile Learning Week for 9 years continuously. Actually, we jointly launched Mobile Learning Week together with David 11 years ago, and I'm very happy to see David here being with us. And we ran this for 9 years. We are now rebranding it, and hopefully we can revitalize this momentum. At the same time, we're also providing support to countries in developing national ICT education policy and a master plan. So far, we have supported directly more than 60 countries. And it's not only a workshop, but we are supporting them until they develop the policies and the master plan, and also the ministers endorse the policy and the master plan and put them into implementation. So more specifically, I would like to quickly launch these 3 intellectual guidelines. And we have a hard copy of them outside in front of the meeting room. You can pick up one of them or some of them after this session. And as I said, we have the guidelines on the ICT education policy and master plan that was released this year in March. And now we already have 2 versions. We already translated this one into Chinese, and we are now translating it currently in other UN languages. And last year, in April, we released the AI and education guidance for policymakers. Now it's available in 7 languages, 6 UN language plus Korean, because the Korean National Commission translates this publication into Korea by themselves. And 3 years ago, we released the guidelines on development of OER policy. Now it's available in English, French, and Spanish. So you can pick up them. And I want to say that this publication is not a kind of a product from the office. It's based on our more than 15 years support for the countries, as I said, working with 60 countries. We build this publication on our experience of working with countries. And that's a very quick introduction to the ICT education policy guideline. And if you look at the discussion paper, you will find that the discussion paper of this Transforming Education Summit, the main ideas, main point are quite aligned with this publication, because this publication published earlier than the discussion paper. So we are promoting a humanistic principle on the use of technology in education, and we promote the digital inclusion as the overall goals for this effort. And we try to avoid, we call it techno-solutionism. And we have the articulation about what we mean by the techno-solutionism. And then we promote that, to ensure technology will be a common good for education. We should also protect the privacy of learners and the teachers. and at the same time, we should predict the risk, the potential risks, and mitigate the risks. So in a way that we should protect digital well-being of students and teachers. This is one of the principles in the discussion paper, but it's already articulated in this publication. At the same time, when we are cooperating with government in developing ICT education master plan, we also talk about the governance and the funding mechanism, including the zero rating funding mechanism, also the general funds, universal funds, all these kind of funding mechanism. We discussed them in this publication, but also we propose a kind of a costing model for the planning of national ICT or digital learning policy. And we propose that, the technology equipment should only account for, 1/3 of the funds, and we should have 1/3 for the development of digital content, 1/3 for teacher training and teacher support. And then with this publication goes very, very deeply on the development of master plan in different thematic areas and different education levels, including how we can promote digital learning in schools and for TVET institution, for higher education and for non-formal education that is under Davis capacity, in the URL, Unesco's Institute for Lifelong Learning. But also we talk how we could integrate digital learning technology in curriculum and assessment, and how we can develop a master plan on the development of digital content and even the building of the EMIS. And in general, we would like the country to think what kind of digital humanism we want to strive for. And the digital humanism is not a kind of static definition. It's a dynamic directions for us to work toward. And based on this, actually it's not only the guidelines, we are also collecting and documenting the best practices. We conduct a lot of case studies along these 3 areas. For example, for the ICT education, we have the UNESCO Prize for ICT education. We ran it for 2 cycles, each of the cycles 6 years. Now we are in the 3rd cycle. We have identified 26 winning countries from 21 countries. All of them are the best practice. At the same time, we have the ICT education policy toolkit. It has a database, probably the largest database of national ICT education policies. And for AI and education, we published the 2 compendiums of best practice. At the same time, last year, we mapping the global K-12 AI curricula. It's a global survey. We found that only 11 countries have developed and endorsed AI curriculum for primary and secondary schools, and 4 of them are under development. And for OER, we also, 4 or 5 years ago, we published a case study about 15 policies and initiatives we call OER policy, cost, and transformation. To my knowledge, this is one of the largest cited publication in this area. And then for the digital open schools, based on the discussion paper, we are pushed to think by the special advisor to the UN Secretary General, why we want to do the transformation, what transformation we want to do, and what are the needs. I think we are facing the same needs over these 2 days and 3 days of debate. First of all, we are talking about the inclusive access, especially for the out of school children and populations, including refugees. And at the same time, based on the COVID, we also know that, we need to reinforce the crisis resilience of the school system and the learning system. At the same time, we are talking about the lifelong learning and lifelong learners. And the World Bank and the UN agency are talking about learning crisis and learning failures. How can we contain the learning failure? And at the same time, we are facing an uncertain future. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. In terms of the crisis, we also don't know what technology will come to market, come to our schools. So we should be ready for a future-proofing learning system, and to prepare our children's students to be ready for the future job and also for their self-fulfillment. Based on this, we think that, the digital open schools can be think through at least 4 scenarios. The first one is that for those who are not in the schools, when the countries, especially with the budget limitation, if the country don't have enough funds to build schools, hire teachers. We need to think alternative schooling models. As one of the schooling model could be digital open schooling model. We will have lessons shared with the EU Foundation about how they are promoting the schooling for the out-of-school children. And then for the existing schools, to avoid disruption, how we can build a kind of digital backup schooling model. And for the lifelong learning, how we can use the technology to enable, we call the digital personalized lifelong learning, especially for the recording of the lifelong learning outcomes. And then for the futures, I think we are aware that the new technology are coming. Metaverse is already become a very hot word. So in the future, the student will face hybrid learning space, meaning the physical space and also virtual space. So how we can prepare them? I think based on this, we can think of the scenarios of digital open schooling models. And based on the discussion paper, if we want to find one thing that this paper can inform us, I think I could see that one of the major trends is really like this. The provision, from the provision perspective, the provision of education perspective, we need to think of a kind of approach I call it introverted approach, meaning that we need to ensure the quality of the provision, but we need to also encourage the open access. Meaning that, if we summarize the discussion paper, we promote that all the countries need to produce curriculum-aligned digital content, or we call it curriculum-alignable digital content, and that will cover all the grade level and all the subject areas. That's the lessons we learned from COVID. If you don't have the digital content to cover all the grade levels, all the subject areas, meaning that the students at a certain grade level, they will not have the distance learning, or they cannot learn a certain subject area. And then we need to have not more and more platform, if possible, should have a one-stop platform for the countries. And then, of course, we need to think of the pedagogical innovation at the digital space. We cannot use technology to replicate the bad pedagogies. And then we need to think of the teachers' human coaching through technology. And then we need to ensure this digital learning, digital platform content, and online coaching will be openly accessible, including adopting open lessons, and to make the platform and the content inclusively accessible for people with disability, and also to think that the content and online coaching should be accessible across different platforms, not only for Google's platform or Microsoft's platform. It should be accessible across different platforms, and then anytime and anywhere. Based on this, the discussion paper promotes that all the countries should have 3 sets of action. The first one is the universal connectivity, connected everybody. Second one, to promote the public, free, and if possible, centralized digital platform and curriculum-aligned content. And the third one is the pedagogy and human coaching. But my worry is that the discussion paper may present a kind of fragmented approach, because we talk about this topic separately. Actually, we need to promote a kind of integrated approach to think how we can integrate these components together, especially to support open schooling models and the learning system. Based on this, if we want to discuss about what do we mean by digitalization of education, and what do we mean by digital transformation of education? Actually, that's one of the opinion that we are going through 3 stages. The first stage is 30 years ago. We call it digitization of information. It's only a piece of information. And then we are coming now currently in the stage of digitalizing the procedures, the business models of education. But still, it's just to digitalize the existing procedures. It's not to transforming them, not to innovate them. So, and then the third stage for the next step is to really think of the digital transformation, meaning that to upgrade the business model of education, including the provision of education. For this, we need to move from we call the instrumental rationality, meaning that we take people as the human resources, to take people as a humanity and a human. So meaning we call it a value rationality, and to have an intersectoral co-governance and also mobilize resources society-wide. And we also need to think that there's kind of decentralized digital private governance, meaning that the digital private sector are coming and they have their rules. We need to find the regulations to counterbalance their influence, and to adopt a humanistic principle and think of the local education needs. And for this, once again, we should go back to the first topic. The policy lever is really, really required. And for this, we need to, in the publication, we promote that the planning of the ICT education policy or digital learning policy should start from the learning and human outcome, and should across different learning settings. It's not only the digital learning in schools, but also the digital learning at home, and also at the third place, and anytime, anywhere. And then come back to the network we are talking about through these sessions. We have some ideas, we want to focus on these 4 scenarios, and including what do we mean, what do we want to do, what do we want to cooperate in the field of open schooling for the marginalized group, and in the field of crisis-resilient open schooling model, and also in the personalized lifelong learning and assessment, especially, for example, how we can use blockchain and other technology to record and and recognize the lifelong learning outcome, but also to think of the future. I'm closing. David is looking at me. And the last slide is that the main objectives of this network. We're thinking that first of all, we already have some pilot project. We get the CAFIT. The Korean government is sponsoring more than 10 million. And we are working with many African countries in testing this model. And we are talking about the phase 3 of the CAFIT. Namibia, Uganda, and Tanzania are in consideration. And then we also want to organize the annual event to recognize these champion countries and champion partners. We are thinking of the rebranding of the Mobile Learning Week. Likely could be the Open Digital Learning Week, thing like this, and we can celebrate the champion countries and champion partners, and also recognize their achievements. And then we want to facilitate the knowledge sharing. Actually, we already have the guiding framework on digital open school in the publication you can pick up. And we also want to open the consultation to improve it, and if possible, to publish a guiding framework. The last piece of information, next week, after this summit, I'm flying, and together with the 2 colleagues, flying to Accra of Ghana to organize a seminar on the same topic. And our colleague, Mr. Diallo, is just arriving. He will close this session. So thank you very much for your time. I hope I did not use too much time.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour votre présentation qui a été très impressionnante, et pour la qualité de votre contribution au sein de la famille de l'UNESCO, car vous mettez vraiment l'accent sur l'importance des partenariats, mais également sur l'importance de la qualité de nos partenariats en matière de technologie. Je vois donc que la discussion que nous menons aujourd'hui est vraiment au cœur du sujet, qui est celui de la transformation du secteur de l'éducation. Car comme vous le savez, la technologie, ce n'est pas seulement améliorer l'accès à des produits technologiques. Il s'agit également de redéfinir les contenus pédagogiques. Car par essence, la technologie, lorsqu'elle est utilisée dans sa meilleure acception, c'est la transformation du contenu. Et je pense que cela a été vraiment très bien mis en exergue au cours de votre contribution. Peut-être un commentaire supplémentaire lié à votre intervention sur la numérisation. Il ne s'agit pas seulement de numériser les manuels et les contenus scolaires, mais également de donner un accès technologique à l'ensemble des apprenants. Encore une fois, je vous remercie. Je vais maintenant accueillir notre deuxième orateur, Monsieur Rupert Wigerif, qui est professeur d'éducation à l'Université de Cambridge et qui va continuer le débat sur les écoles numériques ouvertes et partager son point de vue sur la manière dont différents modèles d'écoles ouvertes peuvent répondre à différents problèmes en matière d'éducation. Merci beaucoup, c'est un honneur pour moi d'être présent devant vous. Comme cela a été dit, je suis enseignant à l'école de Cambridge et je travaille également à l'université à Hughes Hall, Cambridge. Mon premier axe de recherche, c'est la numérisation et la transformation de l'éducation. Et pour cela, nous avons essayé de mener des études basées sur
There's been so much potential for education for a long time. I did a PhD in this area nearly 30 years ago. We were excited about the potential of AI and personalized learning to transform education, but almost very little happened until, of course, we had this terrible COVID epidemic and people began to realize what was possible. Many places, all education went online. But at the same time as realizing what was possible, they discovered the challenges about what was needed, about the lack of resources and the lack of access, the digital inequalities, but also the need for a new kind of pedagogy. So sorry, if you could switch it off for me. I have a PhD student in Ireland who set up an amazing online college, and he wants to make it accessible for everybody in the world, but for some reason he keeps phoning me when I'm trying to do a talk. So what I totally endorse the agenda that Feng Chen was just talking about. Oh, I don't think the access for all, the need for more resources, but particularly the need to have spaces where we can think about innovating pedagogy and think seriously about pedagogy. So I'm just going to offer a very short kind of provocation about the pedagogy, because I see so much that is going on is just pushing out the existing pedagogy. I was amazed recently, as I do, because fortunately I'm a scholar in Cambridge. I was just reading Comenius in 1657, and it's quite extraordinary how he completely predicts the current education system. He advised governments in Europe. He was very excited about the potential of the new information and communications technology of print literacy, and he developed an education system based on print literacy, and he was very explicit. He's saying, how are we going to print the minds of the children? And this was a marvelous system, of course, and it's been incredibly effective, but is it necessarily the best system forever? With the new kinds of technology that we have new possibilities. We can think about education in new ways. At the moment, we have a coherent global education system pretty much on the lines that Comenius sketched, with the different subjects based on literacy, numeracy, and then using that literacy to read key texts in certain areas. I'm not saying this is wrong. I think this is, as I say, this has been amazing. But when COVID hit in the UK and the teaching went online, a lot of people told me it was incredibly boring. They had to sit there listening to lectures, transmission from the teachers. They were not taking advantage of the opportunity. And I was amazed by how many people said to me, the trouble with this new technology, it doesn't allow for human connection. There's no social engagement. But I know how my young friends are using this technology, how they're using TikTok and Instagram and everything. It's all about human connection. Most people meet their partners now online. So the problem isn't the technology. The problem is the way these teachers were using it just to transmit information. And we can rethink this. Is this the best? Is this what education has to be? Because we have always had education. Before we had print, we had education. In every country, we have, in oral societies, we have education as joining communities of practice through dialogue. So the new technology enables us to rethink what would be the most useful kind of education we could have. Do we need to have people doing master's degrees in Cambridge in art history and then getting very good jobs everywhere? Or could we not engage them in real communities of practice to do useful work in the world? Education as relationship, as connection, as not what you know, but what you can do. And a key difference here is this idea that we have developed through print literacy of knowledge as a representation of something. Knowledge as the sort of thing you find in a book in the library. An alternative is knowledge for actually doing things. Knowledge as a relationship with an area that you acquire through apprenticeship, through working with people, through talking to people. This is a little picture from my colleague Kevin Martin, who's done some amazing research in Kenya, using mobile phones and a platform to farmers to educate themselves by uploading videos, uploading their work, and sharing them in the network. And you find that just with one mobile phone, one smartphone, and this can be transferred between smartphones even when there's no access to broadband and Wi-Fi, through communities of practice, through traditional pedagogies of dialogue, people can learn from each other. But they learn in useful ways about how to improve their practice. This is one inspiration then behind the open school idea. This is partly based in the UK. I don't know if you know, in the 60s they developed the Open University, a university for people, anyone, anywhere really, who'd failed to get through the traditional university network. I did my PhD at the Open University. It's still a cutting edge when it comes to educational technology. The idea of the open school developed partly by Tim Brickhouse and my colleague Wayne Holmes in England, and I'm extending it here to follow what Feng Chung was saying about the policy, is that through new technology we can provide access to anybody, access to people who are excluded from school, access when there's a crisis and people can't go to school. And as you've seen, this doesn't necessarily require the broadband that is required by the metaverse. Smartphones, simple information, can be very powerful when they're combined with dialogic education, when they're combined with teaching children from an early age how to learn together with others, how to ask questions, how to listen, how to build knowledge together. And we've shown that this can be effective. So this dialogic pedagogy, which is very traditional, which is found in every culture because it's based on oracy, not just on literacy, is what can make digital connectedness more effective. So the idea of the open school is about empowerment and connection. Empowerment, as we've seen in terms of lifelong learning, as we've seen even these farmers in Kenya were uploading videos and becoming local superstars. They didn't even need to be literate to do this, to share their practice. There are many examples, for instance, in healthcare in West Africa, people putting up videos about how their practice has really spread using mobile networks. So it's about empowering people with content, but also empowering children with choices. Because as Feng Chen said, if you have an online network, there can be many online communities of learning. You can have a personalized route. There can be an infinite number of directions you could take. And some of them, of course, could be more motivating than others. There's a real problem in many places of children not engaging and not being motivated by the education on offer. So you could take areas that do excite their passion, like football, like fashion, like music, and you can learn everything through engaging in these communities. You can take these and you can use them to learn statistics, to learn literacy, to learn about philosophy and sociology, but through pursuing and taking forward their passion. It's also about augmenting and not disrupting the existing school system. I think a very good example from my colleagues at MIT, like Mitch Resnick, is the online mediated peer-to-peer learning platform Scratch. So it's now very widely used in schools where they want to teach mathematics and they want to teach computer programming, but it is actually a peer-to-peer learning community where young people develop programs, share them, and construct knowledge together, but it can then be integrated into the classroom. So it's about augmenting and not replacing schools. It does depend on the pedagogy, which has to be one of empowering, and it links to the ideas that Feng Chung was outlining about future skills. What excites me about future skills is not this slightly abstract idea about these different competencies, which are very hard to measure. It's more the idea from Unesco's project with Riel about seizing the future, about orienting towards the future, not just teaching people about things that were useful in the past, but teaching them about how to be entrepreneurs, how to work with change, how to accept that change is inevitable and to participate in that change. So it's a shift in orientation. And of course, that's all about them learning how to learn together with others, not just on their own, but together with others in teams so that they can participate in these changes that are happening. I hope I'm not taking too long, so I'll just very, very quickly run through some just illustrative examples of these ideas, just to show that it is actually possible. The global dimension is very important. Using lesson study where teachers research their own practice, an idea that came from Japan and is very strong in Korea and China in transforming education systems. We're creating a global platform for teachers to share their practice with each other, in particular domains and areas. I was just telling David about one that's already started for Islamic educators, because globally there are isolated Islamic educators, and now they're sharing best practice, going back to the traditions of Islam, which involve halukah, learning in a circle, discussing together. So that's one potential. I suppose I'm thinking this open school idea shouldn't just be, we developed an idea in England, but why don't we have, like Wikipedia is really incredibly successful. Platforms and apps like Facebook have gone around the world. Couldn't we have a platform or an app where anyone, anywhere could log on and find out the opportunities and find out the resources? It doesn't need to be very high bandwidth. This is that example I was giving. We're using indigenous pedagogy, Kujan Ghana, where they use the ground rules of building each other up, of learning from each other, and always at the end of the meeting, describing what they have positively learned in order to empower each other. And this can be done, say, through dialogic education, just with some smartphone education which people share from a platform. Another example funded by Huawei and British Telecom, very, very quickly, just to illustrate the potential of work experience with cutting-edge companies. This was done in remote and relatively underprivileged areas in the UK. And what we created was a kind of game, a role-play game of being an intern at Huawei or at British Telecom. So a leading figure will share the challenges, engineers will share how they solve problems, and the children will work together to solve those problems. And this can scale up, because essentially it's a role-play game. They're pretending to be interns, but they get a real experience of it. And we could work, and we worked in the curriculum in computing and STEM, but you could work in any area of the curriculum to augment it with this experience of working with others globally. Just to illustrate how we could take this forward. Again, I think Generation Global that are here, getting small groups of children from different countries to work together on global challenges, on how to solve them, on the development goals. So they're learning teamwork and they're learning how to solve problems. And this could augment the rest of the curriculum. Well, those are my main points. I better stop there because I'm sure I've taken up too much of your time. But I think you've seen what we're saying, and it's very much in agreement with what Feng Chung was saying. New pedagogy is possible, so think big.
Thank you for giving us a very, I would say, rich and concrete illustration on how in this digital environment pedagogy can be transformed and how can technology transform learning. You placed a lot of emphasis on learning also as empowerment and also as a collective process. It's all learning with others and from others, which is also a very strong, I would say, principle in the field of adult education. You gave us a number of concrete examples from different parts of the world, and we're going, in fact, to move forward and look precisely at how, in different countries, those concepts are being implemented. Et pour cela, je voudrais tout d'abord
I would like now to talk to Monsieur Sorombulo Aboudou, and that person is in charge of the National Education Alphabetization on behalf of Ivory Coast at UNESCO, and he will tell us about how his country is already part of a process about digitalization, and he will give us some highlights about the project and show us how about technology is increasingly part of the education policy that will be implemented. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Minister Maria Tukone, she was supposed to be here today on behalf of Ivory Coast, but I am here and I'm going to talk on her behalf. So on behalf of the Minister of National Education and Literacy in Ivory Coast, I would like to start by thank you for associating Ivory Coast with this subject of digitalization and open schools, because it is truly a challenge and we need to reach the ODD number 4. Ivory Coast has also passed a law that now makes it compulsory in the syllabus the learning of digital and technology skills. So we have decided to include those skills in the syllabus of Ivory Coast. We have already implemented a few projects and they are ongoing. We have got the UNIFIT project in partnership with Unesco, and I would like here to thank the Republic of China that has funded this project. So again, I would like to let you know that Ivory Coast has decided to make sure that it will play its part in the transformation of the education. We are also part of a new project, part of the Francophonie organization. Of course, the eruption of the pandemic and of the COVID-19 has played an important role in those projects. We are also using increasingly the social networks such as WhatsApp to increase the use of technology in our syllabus. We also have another project that is very important, and it is about network and telecommunication in Ivory Coast. This project is led by Huawei in Ivory Coast. This project has already been launched and it will be ongoing. We are also making use of fiber optic. What I want to let you know is that we are really trying to connect the various departments of technologies in the Ivory Coast to make sure that we can implement the e-learning processes in our country. We've also launched another project with COVID, which is School at Home. This is a platform that we have developed with online learning courses. So we are using the radio broadcast in Ivory Coast so as to broadcast these courses. This platform is devoted for early childhood children and also for higher education. It is a single platform, a unique platform that is devoted to the various people in Ivory Coast. We do have a different syllabus that are using this platform, and we are also trying to work closely with the teams of UNESCO to make sure that the various persons at the Ministry of Education will be able to access these technology products. We also would like here to thank the teams of people of UNICEF who have been working in close collaboration with us to try and make sure that the COVID-19 has not led to increase of the dropout rate of children in our country. But in some villages, such as in Kodoro, we do have a problem. So we have already seen that we've got groups of students who are trying together in different villages to make sure that they can join forces and that they can share their knowledge when they are unable to meet at school because the teachers has to stay home. So definitely we have decided to make sure that most of the teachers and students are permanently and consistently trained with new technologies.
Afin de faciliter l'intégration des TIC dans leurs pratiques enseignantes, en tenant compte des particularités de leur discipline ou de leur spécificité d'enseignement. Parce que vous comprenez, moi, que les mathématiques en ligne et le français en ligne, ce n'est pas la même chose. Tout comme l'anglais en ligne ou comme les physiques en ligne, ce ne sera pas la même chose. Donc, chaque discipline étant spécifique.
So, all those specificities must be taken into account to make sure that our teachers know to have the proper pedagogy. And so we are developing new teacher training activities to help our teachers. And here we have a new project with UNESCO called CAPIT. And so we are members of that project. And the aim is to digitalize the education system in the Ivory Coast. And we are really thanking UNESCO and the Korean Republic to help us, to support us here. The support will help us to create an education system that is equal and resilient, digitalized, and it will help us recover from the COVID and its very strong negative impacts it had on our system. There's also another project called Africa Code Week, which is aiming at teaching the basics of coding to children. It started in 2015 with just a week, and there will be a new event in 2022 to help to explain coding, artificial intelligence, and teach it at school. And so we need to really integrate better all this artificial intelligence to the system generally, including teacher training or adult training, so that adults understand better. And we actually received the Confucius Prize for this project. And it's a model that we've actually reproduced throughout our country to really help digital literacy throughout the country. And so I would like to thank you in the name of the Ministry of the Educational and Literacy, National Education and Literacy. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, pour cette intervention qui nous a permis.
Thank you very much for this intervention that really showed the very high number of initiatives that are being implemented in Côte d'Ivoire so as to develop the digital uses at all levels of teaching, and also for lifelong learning with the different initiatives that you mentioned, for example, for digital literacy through smartphones. And something that is really important in what you said is how training is really central. Teacher training is very central to everything, and especially to the success of the digitalization of teaching throughout the country. So it's really important to support teacher training, and I can see that you've benefited from UNESCO support.
Our experience, and more specifically, I would like to invite the Honorable Esther Anna Gipondoka, Minister of Education, Arts and Culture of Namibia, to share with us the experience of her ministry and her policy in relation to the integration of digital technologies and digital pedagogy in education. Madam Minister.
It's already on. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, I would like to appreciate this concept of open schools, because I believe it's promising, and one is really interested in pursuing further how it operates. Talking about our country, to start with, I need to give you some information about Namibia. Namibia is a very vast country geographically, which is 826,000 square kilometers, but only with a population of 2.6. Now that already gives you a picture of how our schools are scattered in all corners of the country, and how difficult it is for the ministry, especially with regard to the IT infrastructure, to reach every corner of the country. So that's one challenge. But be it as it is, Namibia has been implementing ICT integration in education through a policy that is busy being reviewed now with the assistance of UNESCO. We are busy reviewing our policy. And the main thing that even made our eyes more open is the issue of COVID-19, when we really were failing to reach every learner with our online arrangements. One, because of lack of connectivity, the shortages of digital equipment, and also the issue of digital content, the availability. In Namibia, we only have 32% of our schools which are connected to internet and supplied with some equipment, which is not really enough. 31% of our schools are using School Link for administration. And we are busy always, continually, build capacity of teachers in content development. Our open learning institution has already developed an open learning material on a platform which is catering only for grade 8 to 12. So for primary, pre-primary up to upper primary, we are still busy training our teachers in order for them to be able to develop digitalized content for those subjects. So I'm just trying to give a picture of there is really a lot that needs to be done still in our country. So what we have been doing, especially during COVID, there were a lot of programs that we used to use. for our children to be able to go online. But the whole problem was the issue of exclusion of some children, and especially the poor rural and the previously disadvantaged communities. Those that were needing more of our assistance, those are the ones that we couldn't really reach. So in a nutshell, what we are saying is that where we stand as Namibia, we really need to do a lot, and we would appreciate programs like the open schools, which might assist us in order to be able to really reach where we want to be. The other thing that we are doing in Namibia is that we are coordinating with different ministries and agencies, like the Ministry of ICT, Ministry of Education, working together with the private sector also. So we are really working at looking more into partnership through PPPs, because what we are doing now is mainly for government to fund everything, which is not possible when it comes to the background that I've given you, because we need a lot of infrastructure in order for us to reach all our schools. Now what we are doing is really to pull in our private sector industries in order for them to help us in developing our ICT. So definitely we all know that digital transformation is something that we cannot live without, because it will impact also the overall transformation of our education systems in terms of ushering in the issue of inclusivity, innovativeness, and the issue of initiative wherever we are. So with this, Your Excellency, I think that's all I could say about the efforts that we are doing in Namibia. But what I'm saying is that we are really at the beginning, and we need to do more in order for us to reach everybody in our country. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. I think it was important indeed to stress also the context in which the country operates in terms of isolation and remoteness of many schools and learners, and also how the COVID-19 actually further amplified existing inequalities in terms of access, which is something that was actually documented by the survey that Unesco conducted on the impact of COVID-19 on participation throughout the world. Your presentation also gave insights on another important dimension of this topic. It is about governance and how the Ministry of Education in Namibia is actually developing interministerial cooperation with other sectors, in particular with the Minister in charge of ICT, but also with the private sector, mobilizing expertise, but also resources from other stakeholders being key also to actually address the challenges of connectivity and digitalization towards the development of this open digital school system. Thanks again, Madam Minister, for sharing with us this experience. I would like now to move to our last speaker for this segment, also coming from a country where issues related to isolation and remoteness are very significant. I'm pleased to welcome Mrs. Oyuna Purev-Dorsh from Mongolia, Director of Education Policy and Planning in the Ministry of Education.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you very much for all the people, participants, and the excellencies. And I'm speaking out today on behalf of the Higher Excellency Minister in Kamaglang Lobsanseren. And before the beginning of my speech, I would like to express my pleasure for David and his team and the UNESCO people to giving us this opportunity to share what we have achieved in the digitalization in education in Mongolia, and we will have some insights about the experience and also some of the challenges and the lessons learned. And COVID-19 has a profound effect in education. It's all of you aware of that, and we have been discussing globally about it a lot. And the impact of this pandemic is likely to affect the generations of the children and the young people who lost it during the COVID period. And for example, inequity in education is widened, and the quality of education has faced the serious challenge and the problems. And although we have something like that, we can discuss about a lot of negative impacts about the COVID, but we need to understand that the COVID has provided us a kind of opportunity to realize what we can achieve with the technology advancement. And a few years ago, and especially in the prior of the COVID-19, we didn't imagine that the digitalization would be would be accelerated in such a way. And today we have been discussing about it. And also it enables us to broaden the horizon of the accessibility dimension of the education at least. So, and Mongolia is also one of the countries already experienced, shared the experience. We have been on track of the digital transformation and the digital learning of the people. And so far, we have very solid and good infrastructure of the connection. And all the schools in Mongolia has connected internet. And Giga already expressed that the speed of the internet connection is quite good for the digital learning for the people. Even though we are geographically very much scattered and all the schools are very much isolated from each other, especially from the centers, and we already have the good infrastructure of the connection. And today's, this kind of speech, I would like to share the experience of the two types of the digital open schools in Mongolia. And the first one is about the Digital Open Center attached to the Mongolian University of the Science Technology. It's a kind of long-standing the center. And it has, from the beginning, it has a mission to sustain the lifelong learning opportunities with the people in Mongolia, especially the adults. Because this kind of open resources, we really cannot talk about the lifelong learning opportunities of the people. Even though we speak loudly about the lifelong learning, if we cannot provide this kind of resources and open resources to people, it just doesn't make sense. So that's why, and the main function of this center is to provide the short-term and long-term training to the people, and especially to give the youths and the children to the scale up and the level up their skills, and also the transfer their skills. This kind of the trainings are provided. And also, except this kind of training, the Open Education Center has three main functions. And the first one works as a hub of the open education and resource development in Mongolia, because it has a rich resource of the training in the various areas of the occupations and qualifications. And also second one is, it works as the Open Excellence Center of the higher education development in Mongolia, because it has the rich the training resource for especially the higher education teachers to build the capacity of those people. And the rich and higher education institutions have to improve the quality of the higher education within the institutions. For example, and lastly, we just provided the series of the trainings on the quality assurance of the higher education. And something like that, the functions of this kind of digital open schools are very unpredictable. It can be used in different ways. And the second one is the digital upper secondary school, and we are planning to operate this school from the September to 2022. And we have been preparing a lot. And this school is going to provide the very equal opportunity for the people, children staying in the very remote areas. And it has a lot of the advantages for the children, especially staying in the rural areas, and also those lagging behind of their peers. And also it's going to be very good resource for the teachers to learn from each other. Maybe the best quality teachers going to be teaching in the school, and this digital school, it's going to be 100% digital schools. And some of them is a kind of hybrid. And some of the activities are in class, but some of the activities in online. So it is going to be purely digital and virtual school. So it means in the future, we have the plan to coexist physical and the virtual schools in Mongolia. So this is the beginning of what we would like to achieve. And also we have the EdTech companies. They have the many initiatives to develop the digital content, learning management system, and those are taking place, and the people and EdTech companies are very much enthusiastic to engage in this development. And since we have developing this kind of, I just shared you the two the simple experiences of the countries. And during the implementation of these centers and the planning of these centers, we have learned the very important lesson is that we need to adopt the in-class curriculum into online curriculum, because the training, online teaching and learning, digital learning takes time. So, and just the curriculum we have been used before the COVID-19 cannot simply adopted in the digital learning context. That's the biggest lesson we have learned. And the second one is the Professor Rupert Wegerif mentioned that digital open schools will never ever replace the physical schools and teachers. That's for sure. And because but it can widen all people's learning opportunities, and also it will give us the chance to respond to the different needs of the learners in a personalized way. So this is one of the biggest the lesson. And also digital learning needs to be blended with some of the in-class activities, because especially the young children, they miss the physical in-person or face-to-face interaction. So we need to keep in mind when we discuss about these digital open schools. And also at the end, digital open school is the best approach, most maybe effective and efficient approach in Mongolia, the countries like Mongolia, because we are geographically very scattered, and also the groups or communities of the people have the different lifestyle. For example, the nomadics. So this is very the efficient way, and also this really gives teachers to apply differentiated learning methodology. Because differentiated learning, we tried before the COVID, even before the online training, it's likely to be very challenging. But these open and digital schools are going to change the things. I would like to just mention one example, because we have piloted digital open school for the last 4 months. And in the beginning, it was quite, the students were quite silent, and they didn't know how to interact the teacher in the computer. But gradually, they understood, and they level of the cognition and level of the skill, and they scaled up. But the very good thing is that some of the students, when they come back to the in class, the schools, they demand teachers, I would like to have the teaching like the happening in the digital open schools. So it means students changing their mind and of what they need to expect from teachers. So it's going to push the teachers. And when we have and some discussion and interview with teachers, they said, hey, do you have some kind of the training and how to deliver this quality training through online? Because our students, my student is pushing me and asking me more. And sometimes I cannot respond to the questions. And so this thing it's the change we would like to give, but it's naturally happening. So at the end, we strongly encourage this initiative and happy to be part of this network. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I mean, those were very interesting examples of two models of open schools in Mongolia. The experience that you described also shows that the interaction between teachers, but also between teachers and learners, is transformed by this new approach. So again, it's not about adapting, but it's about transforming, including transforming the curricula, because as you rightly stress, it's not only about a question of digitalization of the existing curricula, but a total re-engineering of the curricula to be able to fully operate within this new digital environment. So at this stage, I would like again to ask you to join me in thanking all the speakers for this first segment, which was quite rich. So thanks again to all speakers, Madam Ministers, dear colleagues. And now we're going to move to the second moment of this session. And I'd like to invite the speakers to join me in moving to the room. We'll leave the place to the other group. Thank you again.
Good afternoon. I am delighted to be in the second half of our session and welcoming our distinguished speakers. During this session, we will learn from two successful country experiences of integration of digital platform, content, and pedagogical integration. I'm talking about Finland and the Republic of Korea. Then, following the recommendation of the thematic paper of Action Track number 4 on the digital transformation of learning, we will center on the marginalized and underserved groups and populations, and we'll hear the voices of small island and developing states and refugees. Finally, the floor will be taken by champion partners, including those from the UN family and beyond, to learn about their innovative strategies and programs for the digital transformation of education. And then we'll explore with them the possibility of establishing this network of champion countries and partners on digital open schools. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Mr. Tommy Himberg. He's the Counselor of Education and Science on the Permanent Delegation of Finland to UNESCO and the OECD. And the case of Finland is featured into a series of upcoming UNESCO case studies that explore the use of distance learning during the pandemic. So we would be delighted to hear from you what were the lessons that were captured and the actions that were taken, and how you are envisaging the futures of the schools in your country. Over to you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by giving a brief context. So, in Finland, the education system is highly decentralized. So, coming from the Ministry of Education, many people during the pandemic and after have been asking, so how did you manage, what did you do? And our response is that, well, we only got a very general idea because what was done at schools, sometimes by individual teachers. So we have, each municipality is responsible for schools and each teacher is responsible for their class. So they have freedom and autonomy to, within a core curriculum which is nationally decided. Within that core curriculum, the teachers are responsible and are independent in terms of choosing the best teaching methods, and they also have a lot of influence on the tools and materials that they are using. So any kind of national average is just a national average. There is a lot of, luckily I'm happy to say, more successes than failures, but there are kind of difficulties and successes hidden behind that national average. The state and the state level, the national level, is not just kind of sitting idly by and kind of expecting the teachers to kind of fend for themselves. We do have plans, we do have financing, we do have support, we do have facilitation, and I think that's one of the important things that we learned, that the meaning of national strong support is something that is needed. It's often these support structures that during normal times they are more or less invisible, but when the crisis hits, everyone is then turning to someone to ask what to do. How should we do this? What should we do with this? And therefore it's the ministry and most importantly the National Agency for Education that have been, especially the national agency that has been really instrumental during the pandemic in providing support for schools and municipalities. I think lessons learned, I can pretty much sum it up to two things. So the first one is the value of collaboration. It is absolutely necessary on the good times as well as bad times to work together. This is something, transforming education, digitalizing education, bringing technology to schools is something that no one can do alone. It's a massive undertaking. During the pandemic, we found a special value in, for instance, in this tutor-teacher network. This was a network that had already been established before the pandemic as an effort to kind of have these champions and these kind of pioneers of very technology-minded or kind of digitally minded teachers in different schools, so that they could support each other to develop pedagogy that would utilize the new opportunities that digital technologies provide. And during the pandemic, they were then pivotal in kind of instructing everyone else in school to how to use the technology when there was absolutely no choice but to actually make that jump to digital provision. All the networks and all the communication between schools and parents, between parents, etc., partnerships with our private sector, etc., they were invaluable. The second lesson learned, I think, is that schools I would say the importance of schools cannot be overstated. What we had during the pandemic, luckily in Finland, a relatively brief school closure is something that really highlighted how important the community, how important the services from school meals to mental health services in schools are. And definitely going forward, we see that when we are investing and when we are developing technology in schools, digital solutions, etc., we are doing those within schools. We are not trying to build remote schooling. We are not trying to build something that's outside of schools, replacement for schools. No, we are just trying to enrich schools as they are. As community centers, they are too important to be bypassed. So I think here we have kind of this rhetorical kind of an issue of narratives that we have to be kind of very mindful of. The development of technology, the development of the digitalization of education didn't start with the pandemic, and it doesn't, and the pandemic doesn't provide a model for how to do that. Even if everyone was forced to use digital technology, that's not what we want to do. Technology must be, it's a tool, it's not really the point or end point or our target. And in that sense, I would kind of say, like, you know, paraphrasing an old saying, that what happens in pandemic stays in pandemic. So we don't want to kind of talk about it too much. Of course, we need to learn these lessons, but we have to go back to the trajectory where we were, kind of take the boost from everyone being now more aware of the possibilities that digital tools give, but go back to the thinking of the humanistic approach to technology that is very, very perfectly, I think, outlined in Unesco's policies. So a little bit more about the future, a couple of words, and then I'll stop. So the future, probably where we want to aim is pedagogy-driven digitalization. So as we've heard from many speakers, that it's not about doing the old things with new and more expensive toys, but it's actually doing new things, new opportunities. For instance, how students can collaborate not just within their school, but also beyond. And many of these things have now been codified or kind of already embedded in our new core curricula, which have been adopted some years before, and now they are now in full action at the moment. They outline new skills, kind of these future skills, and how they are taught in schools. We have, for instance, every school needs to every year organize cross-disciplinary projects for students, from early primary school all the way up to secondary school. And this is an important kind of a break from what we used to have, which is very kind of discipline-based content. And this is, of course, where new technology can be extremely helpful. Another thing where new technology is helpful is that it changes what we need to learn. Not just how we learn, but also what we need to learn. When there are things that we can easily check up from digital resources, we don't need to learn by heart as much. However, at the same time, it's becoming more and more important to understand what's really good information and what is bad information, making the kind of being able to make sense and evaluate the information that we get, combined from different sources. And these kinds of multiliteracy competencies are now at the center of the new curriculum. So this is I think is a big change of mindset. If I'm speaking to people of my age or my parents and what they did in school, this is a big change. Here again, the collaboration with parents is important, so that teachers can explain why this is the way we do things now, and it's not the same as how things were done when they were at school. Now, finally, one sort of important enabling factor, as has been pointed out many times, are these kind of global public goods, open educational resources. And here, again, like my minister upstairs in the previous session, I will echo that and just say that we have a UNESCO recommendation for open educational resources. I think that was a visionary recommendation. It came into force. It was adopted 2019 before the pandemic, and I don't think anyone really understood how important and how pertinent that would be just 6 months after. But that's an amazing piece of document, and I hope everyone will do the utmost to make that into reality. So we have this, we piloted in 2019 the Finnish open digital library for open educational resources, and there's a lot of work still to be done, but I think we are moving on the right to the right direction there. And I think the next step is then to kind of collaborate and link together all these maybe national, maybe regional resources that we have, so that we will have an actual global library of educational resources. And well, finally, I think the UNESCO initiative for digital open schools, it's an excellent one. We're always in favor of working together. We're always in favor of establishing and strengthening networks. And here we can see similarities between this UNESCO initiative and what we have been doing nationally, enabling pioneers, supporting pioneers to build new things, to innovate, and then pull others in their orbit, and in this way kind of grow this critical mass, which will then end up transforming the system so that we will have an equitable, inclusive, quality-enhancing digital transformation of schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tommy. We can clearly see that Finland deserves its role as a champion, and it already is implementing many of the recommendations that are contained in the discussion paper that was just presented. And thank you for highlighting the centrality of teachers and education stakeholders, that if they're given, even in a decentralized system, but if they're given the tools and the support, they can deliver well to the students. So thank you. Now we're going to pass to our second country representative. The Republic of Korea is also the subject of one of the case studies on distance learning during the pandemic. And we would like to hear from the Chief Strategy Officer of CARIS, the Korean Education and Research Information Service, Mr. So, to walk us through the sector-wide approach that was adopted by the Republic of the Korea during the pandemic, and what are the actions that are being taken right now to continue ensuring that the education system is fit for the digital era. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jong-won Seo from Korea Education and Research Information Service, known as CARIS. Let me begin by thanking UNESCO team for organizing this very meaningful side event. And today I'm very happy to be here, and I'd like to share with you how Korea responded to a global pandemic crisis. Specifically, I'd like to talk about how Korea utilized digital technologies to build a safe and sustainable educational environment. Okay, no. Okay, the Korean government made very strong principles and guidelines to responding to COVID-19 since its outbreak in early 2020. There were four main principles in responding to COVID-19. First thing was the openness, transparency, and democratic process are at the heart of the sector-wide policy approaches. We believe that this commitment is very important to lead all citizens' voluntary and cooperative participation. Second, contact tracing and social distancing were very strictly taken place in all schools in nationwide. And the government implemented the wide range of testing and full extension of diagnostic capability. Now, as of June 2022, 87% of Korean citizens are double vaccinated. Lastly, personal sanitary measures were taken in most public places throughout the nation. Wearing a mask and was mandatory not only inside the building, but all the public places in Korea. This diagram shows how Korea Ministry of Education responded to the crisis. This is emergency response governance system by the Korean Ministry of Education. You can see there's a specific task force for K-12 education and tertiary task force education and some budget and public awareness. Interestingly, Korean Ministry of Education has a special role. She has a special role as a deputy prime minister, so she was able to coordinate all different ministries, and this special role makes this governance system really works very well. Another example is the Omicron variant severely hit in Korea last year, so we had to prepare different types of a governance system. There's three different main bodies: vice minister, 17 vice superintendent, and there's over 190 local officers of education. So those three groups made a team, and they have control meetings, weekly meetings, so that under this governance system, the Omicron variant we can serve it out. As the outbreak spread out nationwide, the coordination between Ministry of Education and Center for Disease Control and other public bodies were strengthened. Actually, Korea was one of the first country struck with the COVID-19 early in 2019. This very unexpected school closure brought up to sudden blending of the online learning and offline learning in schools. We have to delay the school opening until April, and the high schoolers go to school a little bit earlier, but the rest of the students go to school a little bit late. This difference is because of the capacity of a platform server and some network issues. Korea developed the ICT in education master plan very earlier, but we never experienced this kind of a full transition to online schooling. When it comes to online learning platforms in Korea, we have two main public organizations. One is CARIS and EBS. CARIS manages the e-learning platform, digital textbook and other digital resources. And EBS is a public educational broadcasting system which operates educational television and radio programs. Mainly CARIS e-learning platforms target elementary school students, where the EBS online class platform mainly focused on middle school and high school. Now I turn into some implementing strategies for online classes. The expanding infrastructure was a very important short-term policy goal. This includes securing cloud resources, providing learning devices, and also reorganizing the learning management systems. Expansion of the public infrastructure, the government made very strong collaboration with the main ICT private providers such as Korea Telecom and Naver, which is one of the largest ICT entrepreneurs. The National Assembly also approved the revised supplementary budget immediately, so that the Ministry of Education were able to make a very speedy contract with the private sectors. And providing teaching and learning content was another key challenge. Okay, this is about the contents. CARIS provided more than 5,500 teaching learning materials. EBS supported more than 43,000 items, including television and radio-based self-directed learning materials. Through public-private partnership, CARIS reserved audio textbooks and other learning materials from private partners. And additionally, CARIS operated the Educational Copyright Support Center, which provides the copyright-related personal consultancy for the teachers. And government enforced the teachers' capacity building. These efforts include preschool teacher training for digital competency, and enforcing teachers' voluntary community of practices. Ministry of Education and CARIS operated more than 495 model schools for online classes. From this initiative, we were able to discover best practices of online classes and new pedagogies for distance learning. When it comes to teacher training, we have to, well, I would say the cascading model worked very effectively well in Korea. The government designated more than 10,000 master teachers who are responsible for peer teachers training, capacity building support. Through this initiative, innovative teaching learning practices spread nationwide. As you can see the diagram, as a result, the number of teaching learning resources developed by teachers has increased dramatically as a short period of time. During the pandemic, we redesigned online classes standard, which include basic rules and some security rules, guidelines for online classes. The Ministry of Education and regional offices of education provided health guidelines as well, and emergency action guide and cyber ethics during the pandemic. These are examples of some 10 basic guidelines for teachers and students. So all schools and teachers have to follow these guidelines, including service stability and safe use of online classes. This diagram shows the online class operation system in Korea. There are two major online class support systems. The e-learning platform operated by CARIS and online class supported by EBS. The CARIS e-learning platform targets elementary school, where EBS own class support K-12. However, main target group is high school students. Attendance checking is a very important part of the online classes. So teachers could be able to check on a real-time basis by checking through interaction with the students. And teachers could also use learning management system as well. Other means such as SNS or other text messages also used for attendance checks as well. So when it comes to evaluation, written test and performance evaluation was also being carried out. Now, I'd like to turn to some policy strategies to overcome this crisis. To resolving digital divide was a very critical issue. So there's some example cases to resolve digital divide through public-private partnership. For example, some private industry partners, they supported a number of digital devices, and some, you can see there are a number of a list of private sectors, they support this crisis. The government also made special policy support for underprivileged students as well. For example, early years of elementary students could take advantage of using EBS television programs. And students from multicultural families were provided with the international materials in various languages. And students with disabilities received some special packages with some home visit. And teachers and parents interaction was another important factor for successful operation of online classes. I would like to conclude my presentation with some lessons learned from our experiences. First of all, the strong public consensus must be put in place. For example, our motto, our commitment was the education must not be stopped despite of any circumstances. With this strong, very strong public commitment, all stakeholders worked out and put education first in the policy agenda. Second, we should make a transition in this unprecedented era using digital technologies to transform education. And utilizing AI and cloud computing can support a new standard for learning platforms. CARIS, with the Ministry of Education, we have been developing a new learning platform we call a learning integration platform. So we work very closely with the private sector. So we try to include all the teaching learning contents as well as a video conferencing, a real-time system as well. Lastly, close collaboration is desperately needed at this time. And then we are concerned that there are a number of learning gaps between countries, regions, and schools. This learning gap and inequity must be solved through our cross collaborations. Thank you very much again for your attention. I look forward to meeting you and discussing this in person the rest of the summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And you were probably a bit too modest, because if it's true that Korea was not able to switch to distance learning overnight, it did it almost overnight. And I think this is a testament of the importance of proper planning, because elements that are also contained in the discussion paper, such as the importance of universal connectivity, robust platforms, the preparation of high-quality content, and the development of teacher capacities have been the focus of the government of Korea for decades, I would say. So thank you for bringing this testimony. And now we go on, again, following one of the recommendations of the discussion paper that was just presented an hour ago. And the first principle is to center on the marginalized groups. Priority for marginalized and underserved groups should be mainstreamed through the reimagining of school models. So it is now my pleasure to give the floor to my colleague from the UNESCO Natural Sciences sector, Ms. Nicole Webley, and she will present to us the work that has been done in the framework of the high-level global dialogue on the digital transformation of SIDS. And she will be sharing with us some examples of good practices, specifically in the area of digital transformation of education. Nicole, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. So firstly, let me say that the SIDS section is fairly new. We were established over a year ago, but this certainly doesn't mean that working in SIDS is new for UNESCO. So let's start with what we know. What we know is that the COVID pandemic made the digital divide more visible, particularly among small island developing states. So the question is, what are we doing about it? And so it's my pleasure to share with you some responses or some actions of UNESCO at the global and regional level, thanks to the collaboration with our field offices. Okay, thank you. So the first example is the global response. And this is particularly interesting because last year we launched a flagship initiative called the Global SIDS Dialogue. And the focus of the dialogue is to mobilize resources and also to raise awareness about issues facing small island developing states. And so the first dialogue looked at disaster risk reduction. And what is interesting is that in the midst of discussing disaster risk reduction, it was proposed that the theme of the next dialogue should look at digital transformation in education. So this shows you how important this issue is for SIDS. And so thanks to the collaborative efforts of the education sector, and the communication sectors, we're planning the next Global SIDS Dialogue in October. So please save the date, and I really do hope that you'll be able to join us. Okay, so the first example that I wanted to share with you from the regional level is the example that was prepared by our colleagues in the Kingston office. And allow me to point out here that the SIDS section is a coordinating unit. And so the examples that we'll be sharing are being implemented by the respective field offices. So our colleagues in the Caribbean wanted you to know that over 91,000 teachers were impacted by the COVID pandemic. And so they were tasked with this challenge of finding a creative way of helping teachers to adapt to this new environment. And so they came up with this project that looks at improving distance learning and blended learning. And thanks to this project, over 90, let me see, before I go, over 12,000 teachers were trained, and their skills were improved in delivering training on using online and blended mechanisms. This one, okay, thanks. So the second example is from the Pacific region, and this is provided by our colleagues in the Apia office. And they wanted to share with us this platform called the Waka Moana regional learning platform that was developed during the pandemic. And it was implemented in 6 countries. And through this project, resources were made available for subjects such as mathematics, science, and English for year 7, for grade 7 students. And it targeted the professional development of teachers and teacher educators. And this project was implemented in partnership with the University of Pacific, as was said earlier. Partnering with our different collaborators are indispensable in ensuring a successful implementation of activities. And one of the lessons learned was that it was important to establish multiple hubs. And of course, this would be important for small island states because some countries are fragmented and have a multiplicity of islands, in fact. So it would be more efficient if hubs were developed to engage the different countries. The challenges identified included the cost and the time frame that it takes to facilitate agreements between the different partners. And this was also identified by the example provided for Timor-Leste by the Jakarta office. And so this example looks at the educational response to COVID-19 in advancing national educational broadcasting systems to ensure continuity and the learning of basic science education for all. So it basically involves using TV to facilitate learning. And this project targeted 13 districts and students grades 7 to 9, and it focused on the subjects of math and science. So through this project, over 1,000 teachers benefited from this program, and over 60,000 students. And of course, this was implemented with the support of the Ministry of Education, and the main output was this online package that was created in EBS, and a guideline, a manual that was also produced to support the teachers in delivering their training. As I said earlier, the main challenge that was experienced in implementing this project was the time factor. It was really time consuming to develop the partnerships or develop the agreements between the multiple partners, and to also develop the documents. One of the lessons learned, I think, is the fact that this initiative brought together different EBS projects, and so they were able to learn from each other. So my final example is from Eastern Africa. It was provided by the Nairobi office, and it looks at the countries of Comoros, Mauritius, and Seychelles. And so in partnership with Microsoft, training was provided by the Ministry of Education for administrative staff and ICT trainers. And this is an interesting example because the prior examples looked at trainings that focused on teachers and students, but here we have an example where the administrative staff is being targeted, because they are also important in delivering education. And so Comoros and Seychelles also were provided with digital libraries for training, and with devices that are able to be used without internet connection. And this is really important because there's often a connectivity problem in the SIDS. So the main challenge that we wanted to identify with this initiative is that there is still need for ICT support in these countries, and facilitating digital ownership and access for all students, particularly at the higher education level. So these were just some quick examples I wanted to share with you of Unesco's response in the SIDS. And I really do hope that you take this into consideration for the network that's being established, because SIDS have something to contribute, as you can see from the experience that I've shared, but they also stand to learn from this network. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole, for this very comprehensive overview of very concrete projects. We are very much aware that we are running late. Unfortunately, the interpreters have had to leave, but we are continuing. And please note that we are broadcasting this event, so there's many more people that may not be in the room, but they're listening to us and to this very interesting discussion. And I am particularly honored to welcome our next speakers. We know that technology too often exacerbates existing gaps while it should bridge them. The refugee populations are particularly affected when it comes to low participation in education, and particularly higher education. So it is with immense pleasure that we welcome here today Rahilda Herrera, who is a young representative from Venezuela who could benefit from the DAFI program of UNHCR and complete higher education path. And with her, there is Jackie Strecker, Connected Education Officer from UNHCR. So I leave the floor to them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Railaris Marchena, and I feel very honored to be here raising my voice in behalf of refugees placement leaders in the pursuing and transforming education. Thank you. When I lived in Venezuela, I was fortunate to have learned digital education, but internet access was very limited, and this was so trouble for me when I was studying and doing my school works. And if I was there too much time, I had to pay a certain amount of money, which was too much for many students. The whole situation for me was incredibly limiting, because when I was in my last year of high school, I really wasn't sure what I want to study at the university, and I really want to make a lot of researches and a lot of courses, and really not have access to these internet connections for completing all this information. And I was feeling in that phrase, so close and so far, because I was looking at all the opportunities I could have and not getting enough internet access to get into this or getting involved in this. And also, I can have internet access at my school, and I don't have internet access at my house. So all the internet my mom or my dad could get into, I can't use it at all, because I was living with my sister without this access, and she could not complete all the information she could get, so I would not really want to affect her too. And when I arrived to Mexico, and then I start to have Wi-Fi at home, I feel that this frustration disappeared. It had an open door to learning. But providing the tools, it's not enough. You have to provide the guidance. You have to provide the step-by-steps. And you have to open the range of possibilities to the persons that they find these benefits from the digital learning. For my career, digital animation, the use of technology is so essential, and I feel very fortunate I can complete my dreams and I'm following this amazing dream, because this is my story. But what about the other percent of the refugees, the other refugee students that don't have real access to this? The lack of access to digital learning is the world, and especially for refugee community, continue to place barriers to integration, learning, a development of these human beings. Even during the pandemic, one of the most disadvantaged students groups was refugees, who didn't have access to these digital learning tools and even go to the schools and even go to the universities and can complete the studies. And then we find out that this situation, something that we know that it's a right, the education, now became a privilege for social and economic issues, and it became a huge situation, a huge problem. Because if we want to transform education, we must start by providing the same learning opportunities to every human being. We all know that digital learning has become an essential element for the development of every child, every youth. It's a part of our daily life, and this could open doors to a new era, to a new world. All in this room know that the world has been passing a lot of things. There's a lot of things happening at the same time too. We have pandemic, war, pain, but we won't be able to change this. We won't be able to change the world if we provide education, if we provide the tools, if we provide the opportunities to the minds and souls that could take action of it. If we don't open the doors to equality in education and access to digital learning for these communities, including refugee communities, we will not have a big impact. This impact will be minimized, and a minimized impact, it's not enough for education. We are all humans, and no human is illegal. We all deserve the same opportunities. No human deserves to have a less opportunity road just for being a refugee, just for being part of a community. Let us start taking actions of ensure every learning to digital be included. Thank you so much.
I know we're very short on time, so I'm going to say a very few words, but just to note, I mean, I think students in these discussions are so important and hammer home why we need to ensure that digital learning is inclusive. Many of you might know on June 20th, we celebrated World Refugee Day, and there was an unprecedented number of displaced. 100 million people are displaced today. We need to make sure as we transform education that refugee, displaced learners, learners with disabilities, girls, underserved populations are included within our national, our regional digital learning initiatives. When we look at the open schools models and a lot of the elements that were talked about today, the most important piece is that these aren't set up as separate systems, but rather systems that are being included, create pathways to the formal system, and we can do that in a way by creating and designing for inclusion from the start, looking at ways that resources can be open, can be free, clear licensing. These are vital for us to then be able to use these digital resources, this content, these learning platforms that governments talked about today, to ensure that everyone can have access, even in places where we might not have connectivity or reliable energy. We need to design for inclusion from the start so that we not only center on the most marginalized, but we can ensure that the transformations that we need in education reach all learners. And that's the only way we're going to be able to establish the goal for education for all and meet the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahildaris and Jackie, for this very inspiring moment and for reminding us that, yes, no human is illegal, and we should start from the most marginalized in interventions, especially for the digital transformation of education. So thank you for this moment. Now we move to the final part of the session. The discussion paper put forward some key recommendations, including universal connectivity, development of content, and establishment of partnerships. So we would like to recognize the champion partners in supporting this joint effort with the commitment to continue sharing knowledge after this meeting. So briefly, to each of the speakers, I would like to please share their experiences and best practice in their respective organization and react to the idea of establishing this network of champion countries and partners. So we will start with Mr. Frank Van Capel from UNICEF, the Senior Education Advisor for UNICEF. The floor is yours. And if you, yes, thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. I was going to talk about something different, actually, but Professor Wegrig reminded me of a story of a friend of mine, and two lessons learned from that story, which I'll get to very soon. So I have a friend, Giri, from Nepal, who grew up in a small, remote village where there is a primary school a couple of kilometers away. He had to actually avoid being eaten by tigers on the way to the school, and then he never completed his schooling. And then he actually managed to get sponsored to finish high school in the Netherlands. And after that, he managed to do university as well. That's where I met him. And after completing university, he went on to do his PhD at the Open University. And just like Professor Wegerer, he's an alumni of the Open University. And I was just reminded of that story, and there's two very valuable lessons learned in that. One is the potential of marginalized children, like my friend Giri was, growing up poor in a remote village with very limited schooling opportunities. And that's the potential of technology as well. If you realize the potential of open schools, those children don't have to rely on the kindness of a stranger to put them through the education system. That incredible potential of those marginalized children, millions of them, who are not realizing that potential, and open digital schools have that potential to provide that kind of opportunity. Now, a second lesson learned from my friend Giri, and that is the gap between what we are studying, what we are sometimes listening to in lectures such as these, what we read in books and in academia and in papers, and the reality. That friend of mine, Giri, was a fellow student in an international development course, and he was constantly challenging what we were learning from our professor and what he experienced in the reality, and that was very different. And I think we made that mistake again during COVID, when we were following models and not considering the reality that children are in. We talk often about when schools closed, children went on to online learning. No, they didn't. In many countries, more than 90% of children were not doing any form of remote learning, or online learning, I should say. So going back to online learning for whom? And an important part of that is that we need to go beyond technology. Actually, Ms. Herrera earlier was saying, we need tools is just one thing. And that was the problem, because you think, oh, those 80-90% of children, they were not learning online because they were not connected, because they didn't have devices. That was not true. Actually, in some of those countries, 40, 50, 60, 70% of the children, they had some connectivity, they had a device. But it's not at all like we imagined, sitting behind a laptop with our high-speed internet connection. No, they had a smartphone which cost maybe $20 or $30. They had to share that smartphone with their siblings, and had maybe 1 hour of use per day. And they didn't have any bandwidth, so they couldn't follow live lessons. So the most astute, skilled teachers actually managed to adapt to that. There was a teacher from Sri Lanka who spoke at one of our events recently, and it was incredible. You do something like WhatsApp, which is sometimes zero-rated by the internet providers. and you send materials which take only a little bit of bandwidth, and they use their textbooks and their notebooks, and then they take a picture of it and send it to their teacher, and that requires very little bandwidth, very little time behind a mobile phone. And it actually works on a very small screen size as well. So that's a lesson learned from my friend Giri as well, is that the reality is often very different from how we imagine it, and we have to take into account those realities and build for those realities. So that said, I mean, as UNICEF, we are looking at some of the gaps that we have and some of the lessons learned from COVID in terms of, you know, what is the support that teachers need? What is the support that schools need? Because often it was, you know, at the school level that there was not sufficient guidance. Even if the technology was there, teachers were not sure how to continue the remote learning. So that is what we're producing now as UNICEF, those kinds of guidances that go beyond the national plans and strategies, which are sometimes fantastic, really well put together and well articulated. But then when it comes down to the implementation, that's where the gap is. And also the monitoring and actually ensuring that things are happening as we are imagining it. So let me just stop there since we're over time, and thank you.
Thank you. We are indeed over time, and we have to improvise a bit. So let me now pass the floor to Mr. Cătălin Marinescu, the Head of Strategy and Planning Division of ITU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will speak from here, and I'll be very short because I'm losing my connection, my train connection, and I need to leave. Very short. I'm from International Telecommunication Union. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's the UN Agency for Telecommunication and ICTs. And I will share with you two facts. 2 weeks ago, the member states, 193 member states of ITU, show their commitment to connect all the schools before 2030. How? In a resolution in the World Radio Telecommunication Development Conference. Probably you didn't know about that. Probably they are not telling to the Ministry of Education in their countries. Second, my second fact. We've spoken a lot today about digital transformation. In ITU, one of our strategic goals, one out of two, is digital transformation. My question to you, and I'm not waiting for an answer, is who is doing the digital transformation in education? Only Ministry of Education? And now, coming back to what the examples from Finland and from Korea show, no, I think we need to cooperate, all of us. We need to you cannot do alone digital transformation. You should not plan or you should not develop the technical schemes for the digital network in your countries to assure the education. You just need to design what are your requirements for a good digital learning. And the technicians coming from the UN system or from your national government, that's why a whole of the government approach is the one that can be recommended for that, or from the private sector, they will come and put in place the network you need for digital education. And another lessons I learned, and maybe I suggest to you, set up some targets. That's why we insisted in the document, in the report of Action Track 4, with targets for school connectivity. Set up targets. Without targets, you'll forget about your objectives, yeah? And yeah, we need partnership. We are very happy that we are invited to be part of the network. We are committed to contribute with our expertise in the technical areas for digital transformation of the education. And I'll stop here, just to leave my colleagues to some time to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now it is my pleasure to leave the floor to Claudia Jarger, the Vice President, Board of Trustees of the U Foundation, Education for Children in Need, who will give us an overview of some innovative projects that use applications and AI in for underserved groups and population. Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Excellency, UNESCO, dear participants of the pre-summit, I'm very happy to present 2 innovations in education that are already realized and ready to scale, especially for West Africa. I will shortly present our U Foundation, an initiative of UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador Dr. Ute Henriette Ohoven, and in official relation with UNESCO. U Foundation works for equal chances and especially for SDG 4. All our programs follow the aim of measurable outcomes and long-term impact, our so-called UN 4, aiming for added value for the beneficiaries, the countries, the program-related SDGs, and the donors. Through social investments, we empower children, youth, and women, whole communities to help themselves. Our program developments and implementations are, of course, participatory and according to the countries and circumstances are developed as self-maintaining models or are taken over by responsible interest groups or ministries to best ensure sustainability. Now I wish to shortly display 2 examples of projects that are already active in West Africa. First, CINIDI, a video-based quality teachers coaching app to reach SDG 4. If we believe that transformation starts with teachers, then CINIDI is an answer. Implemented in Sierra Leone, tested in Liberia and Ghana, it allows quick scale-up possibilities throughout Africa. We all know the generally poor quality of education, especially in rural Africa. Therefore, to reach SDG 4 and equal opportunities, we all have a challenge to get teachers to the education qualifications we need so as to best stop students' dropout rates. With CINIDI, we bridge the gap, especially for teachers in rural areas, and it also works offline. And with most user-friendly, high-quality video contents and teaching models, we are able to train teachers to the needed quality, pedagogical skills, and also empower teachers' self-esteem in education. Further, CINIDI teaches phonetics and foundational reading, which is also a big issue for teachers and students consequently. The app is fast and can easily be adapted to countries' needs, curriculum, and languages. CINIDI is realized in West Africa, in Sierra Leone, with trained, high-skilled West African teachers. Maybe we will have the chance later to show the short video of it. And now we believe that the millions of out-of-school children to be brought back into education also require the platforms to reach them. And artificial intelligence can help us exactly here. With the Rising Academy Network and with the support of U Foundation, I wish to present Rory, the AE personalized learning support for those that need it most. Rory delivers mass tutoring to any handset with access to WhatsApp. It's an AE-powered chatbot tutor for personalized learning. Rory asks practice questions and understands all answers. It automatically adapts its content and the learning levels. it starts, repeats, or follow on according to the student's pace. Rory takes you on with progressively more complex sequences. If you stuck, Rory provides explanations and key concepts from the audio curriculum library. It picks up where the student left off, increasing engagement and establishing a real connection. Would you like to meet Rory? Then please scan the QR code and start over WhatsApp by typing, "Hi Rory." Rory is in testing in Ghana, and the results that Rising Academy collects are very encouraging. With over 100,000 interactions so far, and with an average of 53 additional minutes of learning per user per day. With Rory, the most important outcome is the improvement of quality education at an accessible cost for all. We are still seeking for support for Rory to test it with further 200,000 students and refine its capabilities. Thank you very much for your attention, and for any information, please see my contacts here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. I really think you generated a lot of curiosity of these two very innovative initiatives. Now it is my pleasure to leave the floor to Ms. Ethel Agnes Pascua Valenzuela, the director of the Southeast Asia Organization of Ministers of Education. You have a difficult role of being the last speakers today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Thank you very much, Dr. Feng Chun, for inviting me in this presentation. It's always a challenge to be the last speaker, but I'll try my best to be very brief. Well, as you know, during this time of pandemic at the Ministries of Education level in Southeast Asia, we have been working closely together. I think there has never been a time when the ministers have worked together collaboratively, but it's during the pandemic. First, as you see, in Southeast Asia, we have an equal access to ICT infrastructure. I would like to mention we have Brunei, Cambodia, we have Myanmar, we have also Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Vietnam, Timor-Leste. And in this time of pandemic, they have all different approaches and responses. While the others, 50% may be using ICT, online, Zoom, but half of the students would not be able to access. So what have we done is actually to, call on the ministers of education to come together, call for action to champion education transformation. Since the time of pandemic 2020, we have been meeting virtually with them, and they have adopted several commitments and action agenda. Well, what I would like to share with you is just one of the many things we have done during the pandemic. And this is DTEM, or the Disability Inclusive Education and Emergency Online Course, which we have developed with Unesco and funding support from Global Partnership for Education with all our CMEO centers who have helped each other. So I just convened them, and this is our priority, addressing barriers to inclusion, use of ICT, and of course, we revitalize teacher education. They're really, really suffering during the time of pandemic because they have to move to online learning. But open schools, digitalization would not be effective without using the context of the country and, of course, languages. So in this particular intervention, when we develop the modules, first in English, we have to translate this so that teachers will benefit in Bahasa, Dongska, in Bhutan, Khmer, and Laotian, and Tetum. But I was surprised that not all teachers can still access, even if it's in local language. They don't have access to all the digital devices that you say. Some are using, mobile phones only, and still modules. Do you know that these modules which we did in the online form were printed by teachers of Timor-Leste because they don't have access? So we supported this blended learning approach. And after the project, I still translated that to other languages in our region, in Thai and Vietnamese. This is with the leadership of Simeo Center for Special Education Needs and all our Simeo centers in different countries. And I'm surprised today, as I look at it, 65 countries have accessed our online course. And we have more and more teachers of learners with disabilities accessing our modules. And this is open to the public with local orientation and regional launch. And our, our toolkit for remote teaching and learning is really very useful for them to jump into different types of online classes. So lessons learned during the pandemic, well, we need to focus on improving the ICT competencies of teachers. Not all are really techie. And we need to have the contextualized approach in our intervention. Education recovery is at the heart of intervention, and we should support partnership, collaboration, and networking. We cannot do all of these things without UNESCO, without our Simeo centers, and without the ministers of education approving our modules and being with us in launching all of this program. Well, thank you very much. This is just one of the many. We have webinars, and we have reached over 2 million teachers already, master classes with all our member countries, Associate, British Council, New Zealand, Australia, and more. So key is, you can only do this with all of those collaborating agencies. So thank you very much, and please visit our YouTube channel and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethel, for showcasing all these very interesting initiatives and for taking very gracefully the role of the last speakers. It is my pleasure to invite the head of office and representative of UNESCO in Accra, Ghana, Mr. Abdurrahman Diallo, to deliver some closing remarks. Thank you.
Merci, Michaela. Thank you, Michaela. I think we spent enough time, and the session was very long, but very, very, very rich. I wish to thank all the organizer first, the unit of function, ICT, the FLI here in our jargons for the organization of these sessions. I read the concept, one of the objectives. The objective was to establish this network of champions. And eventually we're sharing good practices, share knowledge on different diverse digital open schoolings, and at the end plan an annual event on open digital learning as a rebranding of MLW, the Mobile Learning Week. Well, I think the network is there. The network, it's a reality. You are here. The UN, UNICEF, UNHCR, ITU, UNESCO, we are there, we are already there. We have the different perspective from countries, very diverse, from small islands, the countries Asia Pacifica, Côte d'Ivoire, Namibia, Mongolia. So we have this perspective of countries, and we have been reminded, of course, we seem to start from COVID-19. The journey on inclusion of ICT in education starting long before, and it's included, it's in the SDGs. So COVID-19 just gave and emphasized the importance. So it was a long journey before, and now it's just we emphasize the importance, and now we have to make the best of the lesson we learned. So I want to record a few important, the need of the cooperation, we said it, local and international. This need, of course, the teacher role, centrality of the teachers. We tackle the issues of infrastructure and connectivity. You cannot do one without the other. We are not replacing the traditional school. We are not replacing. ICT in education is here to contribute to improve the learning outcomes. Government, the ownership. Several countries reminded the importance of the policy. The government is to be there to ensure that all these solutions, all these opportunities that these networks of champions, the Global Education Coalition is providing to the countries is meeting the country's blueprint and policy. It's needed. I was very happy to hear from the U Foundation that Riro, or this initiative was in Ghana. I'm in Ghana, so I know a few of these initiatives, but this one I was not in the know. And it's important to know, to build the right synergies, because we cannot come with beautiful initiatives, but which is not a sustained one, just a pilot one for a few months or the time of the project. So there is this need really of the ownership of the government, and I do really like also the president of Namibia when the minister really insisted of this intersectoral approach that they were leading. So government leadership is really key. So that's what I wanted to take it. It was not my role to recap, but just to be to be positive and to be very optimistic, because I said the network is here, the champion network is here. We just have to fine-tune our response. We have to take into account the context. Our colleague from UNICEF said reality, all these figures that what is the actual figures, the reality, and ensure that the government is in the right place and that we are responding collectively to their will, to the priority to ensure access for all and access to digital to contribute to improve learning outcomes, but not replacing the traditional school. So thank you all, and we'll continue this journey. We are at the heart of the discussion of the Action Track 4. It was a continuation of the discussion this morning. We'll pursue this conversation in countries, and hopefully so will come in New York with other tangible coalition also to respond to the needs of our countries. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.